In 1919, when Jack Dempsey challenged champion Jess Willard for the World Heavyweight Boxing Champion, it was no surprise and even expected that Damon Runyon would join the circus in Toledo, Ohio for the big fight on July 4th. In fact, if you look carefully at James Montgomery Flagg's famous painting of the encounter, you'll see Damon Runyon at ringside. Damon Runyon became a literary figure after the publication of his Broadway short stories in the 1930s, and the subsequent film adaptations made him known around the world, leading to reprints and collections in the subsequent decades. But before, during and after that time, he was first and foremost one of America's greatest newspaper columnists and sports reporters. In 1919, Runyon scooped his colleagues by interviewing Jack Dempsey for a series to recount the boxer's life story, which I collected for the first time in A Tale of Two Fists. What follows are extracts from Runyon's writings. So let's journey back in time more than 100 years ago to the sweltering summer heat of 1919, when Jack Dempsey became Jack the Giant Killer. Long Branch, New Jersey, April 13th, 1919. Jack Dempsey spent some years of a tumultuous existence clinging to the rods or riding blind baggage or decks of freight and passenger trains. The story of that part of his life is a story of constant conflicts with flinty-hearted shacks or railroad conductors and brakemen, with town hacks or constables, and with bulls and dicks and elbows, other titles by which the gentry of the road denominate limbs of the law. Dempsey is a sort of Jack London of the prize ring. Of course, Jack Dempsey has not the education and little of the finer fibre of London, and never will have, but their early experiences were almost identical, and Dempsey would have been a man after London's own heart. Dempsey is matched to meet Jess Willard on July 4th for the heavyweight championship of the world, and incidentally for the largest purse ever offered for such a contest. Dempsey is to receive $25,500 no matter what happens to him in that fight. By slugging himself into a position where he is able to command this championship match, Dempsey has already made thousands of dollars in other fights by working with shows and otherwise. It is said the heavyweight title is reasonably worth $250,000 to a man. Willard, who has made at least a couple of $100,000 since beating Jack Johnson in 1915, gets $100,000 for this fight alone. A few years ago, a $20 note would have brought Willard and Dempsey together. "I've fought for a lot less," comments Dempsey. Toledo, Ohio, June 24th, 1919. The challenger is pretty nicely quartered, especially as compared to Willard's ramshackle station. However, Willard doesn't live where he trains. Presently, there was stir among the crowd outside as a figure in a red dressing gown appeared. It was Dempsey. As he walked away from the house, the crowd mechanically fell in behind him, and the procession moved to an enclosure of canvas walls, which reminds one of a sideshow. There is a ring on an elevated platform in the enclosure, and in this ring, unprotected from the sun, Dempsey does his boxing. The crowd has to stand. It is a hot place. The first tier of people are standing round the ring is usually made up of sporting writers here on business bent. "He looks a bit drawn to me," remarked Leo P. Flynn, the old carpetbagger of pugilism, as Dempsey mounted the platform this afternoon. Flynn manages Bill Brennan, who is to meet Harry Greb in Tulsa July 4th. After watching Dempsey go through 6 fast rounds with his partners, Leo asserted that he is going to wire home to take an inventory of his household chattels to see if there is anything more negotiable lying around. "Lucky he's not even breathing hard," he said, as Dempsey jumped off the platform at the conclusion of his work and pushed through the crowd. There is no doubt that the Colorado boy is today all the imagination pictures a fighter ready for a great ring battle. The boxing he did was the first in some time. He has been taking things easy, just lying around, as they said at training camp, and the danger of his going stale has been greatly minimised. Training camp knockouts are never very impressive, but Jack hit Big Bill Tate a stock doggler in the stomach, and the giant Negro hit the floor only slightly less hard. He was seen ruefully shaking his head and inhaling the contents of a smelling salts bottle. Dempsey is a terrible body puncher, and while Tate managed to clout him frequently with a long left, Jack never failed to get past it and soak Bill in the body. Tate says he was trying to uppercut the Coloradoan when Dempsey shifted suddenly and crumpled him up. Dempsey also boxed with Jamaica Kid, a speedy 150-pounder from St. Paul. Malone made Jack step rapidly, and the contender seemed to like to work that way so well that he made Kearns give him an extra round with Malone. Dempsey is as fast a foot as a matador. He is hitting accurately. He also seems to have tremendous strength. He is ready. He is in grand condition. If Willard loses, he can certainly never offer the alibi of lack of opportunity to get himself ready. If his defeat traces back to his training, the fault will be on his own shoulders. He absolutely refuses to change his system and will not have a coloured man in his camp. It happens to be the case in pugilism just now that the only men in the country who might make suitable sparring partners for Jess are coloured. Jess Willard's work with his sparring partners today was long drawn out enough, but it again lacked the ingredient of quality. It may be because he is unable to show it to advantage on such fellows as Monaghan, Joe Chip, Hempel and Steamboat Scott, but it seems to me that Willard's left is nothing to what it used to be. He used to let it go with a vicious snap, and there have been few better left hands. It hit with crashing force. Now he pushes it out rather than snaps it. His old uppercut appears to be as good as ever, however, and against a smaller man it would seem that this would be his best punch. There were big crowds in both camps. A large number of women were in the crowds. In fact, the number of women who go to see the big bruisers at work is surprising. Toledo, Ohio, July 1st, 1919. The greatest fighters in the world, barring the several million who recently concluded the big brawl overseas, are all ready for the Battle of Toledo. Mr. Willard says he is fit. Mr. Dempsey says he is fit. The experts are having one after another, that is to say, fits. Everybody is raring to go. Toledo is filled with transients. It is commencing to look as if Mr. T. Rickard's dream of an 80,000 crowd on July 4th will be realised. This will be exclusive of the experts, who are apt to form another crowd of 80,000 by themselves, judging from the rate at which they are still reining in on the city. The real rush of visitors is expected to begin tomorrow. By Thursday night, Elbow Room is apt to be at the good old Premium in Toledo. A former department store building of several floors in the heart of the business section has been equipped with several hundred cots to a floor, and in this kip joint, as Mr. Dempsey might have called it in his hobo days, one may secure a species of rest at $2 per night. The local hotels and rooming houses are crammed, so those cots are apt to appear most inviting to the weary wayfarers Thursday night. Toledo, Ohio, July 2nd, 1919. Hotter than a boiled potato today. Everybody all smoked up with excitement and the weather. Toledo, Ohio, July 3rd, 1919. It is said that 52,000 people paid to see Willard work. Dempsey must have drawn at least that many, and at both camps the price of admission was often boosted to $50. There never was a sporting proposition so thoroughly commercialised. In fact, it has been lifted, or lowered, if as you please, from the plane of sport to the level of business. One has to carry a shoehorn to get through the jam in the lobby in the Hotel Secor, which, by common consent, is Fistic headquarters. It had the sound and atmosphere of a betting ring around noon today, and enough mouth wagers were recorded to cover the state of Ohio, and still leave enough to lap over into Kentucky. Ring Lardner, the humorist, was seen dashing about in a swelter of perspiration trying to get down another $500 on Willard. Mr. Lardner already has placed 5 yards on Jess, as the saying is, and the fact that he is a humorist might cause his bets to be regarded with some suspicion, were he not betting real money. Real money is not funny, even to a humorist. My guess is Dempsey inside of 6. Now take a guess and we're all set. In the immortal words of the lamented Billy Jordan, let her go, and may the best man win. Toledo, Ohio, July 4th, 1919. Once, while sitting in his corner beneath a dingy old umbrella covered with advertising signs, before the fight, Dempsey smiled. He sighted Tad, the cartoonist, sitting at the ringside, and the beetling brows of the challenger softened as he relaxed his features. That was about the only time. His face was so set that many thought he was nervous. Over in the other corner, beneath a new brown umbrella, Willard fairly beamed on the crowd, nodding pleasantly to familiar faces in the audience and conducting himself like a man at a function given in his honour. Dempsey never even glanced at Willard until they put up their hands. It is Dempsey's way. When they stood together in the centre of the ring with their hands clasped for the benefit of the moving picture men, Jack did not look at his giant antagonist. Willard, on the other hand, seemed pleasant and chatty. He seemed a friendly soul trying to make up to a morose neighbour. When they faced each other to listen to the instructions of Ollie Picord, the referee, Dempsey stared at the floor. He scarcely seemed to be listening. Willard was all attention and still very pleasant. The men returned to their corners and Dempsey continued to look everywhere but at Willard. Something went wrong with the bell. It was on Willard's side of the ring, and it gave off a feverish light tinkle when Warren Barber, the former amateur heavyweight champion, who was the official timekeeper, gave it a tug. Willard heard it and started to leave his corner. Then he saw that Dempsey was still leaning against the ropes opposite him, his back to the ring, and he realised that Jack had not heard. Willard glanced expectantly at the timekeeper. Barber gave another yank, and again the bell tinkled softly. Willard once more started forward, but still Dempsey did not hear. He stood pouring his feet on the canvas and leaning out over the crowd. From a seat nearby, his camp jester, Max Kaplan, was making an unearthly outcry. Jess nodded and smiled in most polite manner, and finally Dempsey turned as the bell tinkled, and Jack understood that the fight was on. Round 1. They advanced towards one another, Dempsey crouching slightly and his shoulders moving in that curious shimmy style which he had made his own. Willard was fairly upright. Willard made the first lead. It landed lightly. Dempsey paid no attention but kept marching in. Willard dabbed at him slightly several times without much effect. Dempsey walked around crouched and shimmying as if he was studying his strange monster before him. Then suddenly the Coloradian began slashing out. Dempsey hits without apparent direction. He sees a target in front of him and he begins hitting and keeps hitting, and he hits with deadly force. He was half leaping as he hit at Willard's jaw, towering above him. First the left hand, then the right went swishing upward. Its first lead was for the broad white body spread so invitingly before him, and his fists seemed to sink in as they landed. Then the attack shifted to higher ground, so to speak. Willard seemed to have no sense of location whatever as he tried to stave off the first rush of the challenger, which he had been told to expect and which had come just as predicted. Dempsey's fists fairly thudded against Jess's stomach. Then suddenly a brown sinewy arm with a gloved fist at the end shot upward to Willard's jaw, and the champion seemed to crumple up in the very middle. His gigantic body plumped to the floor. The crowd went stark mad. Hats flew into the air, and the pine crater on the banks of the Maumee Bay, where the men were fighting, erupted with a terrific volume of human voices. But Willard was knocked down for good. He was on one knee, listening intently to Ollie Picord as the referee counted. Willard knew what he was doing then, all right. He asked the referee what the count was and got on his feet before 9 as Pacord raised his voice to impart the information. And now the wildcat was loose. Dempsey swarmed up to the gigantic form of the Kansan. Now Willard was on the ropes, his great weight causing them to sag deeply. Now he was half under them. A haze had settled in his eyes. He had the look of a man gazing through the mist. Now you couldn't see the right eye at all. Now the blood began welling from cuts on his face and slowly trickling down his cheeks. 7 times the champion was down on the floor for the count in the first round. Willard was almost knocked out in that first furious rush of the Colorado boy. In fact, everybody thought that was out and that the fight was over. The faulty bell had tinkled, but few had heard it. Men rushed into the ring and confronted Dempsey. The new champion was leaving the ring when Ollie Pacord, the Toledo referee, who had kept his head well during the clamour, made his handlers understand that only the round was over. Then Jack Kearns, Dempsey's manager, drew him back to his corner. Some have suggested that Dempsey's leaving the ring might have constituted a technical infringement of the rules, but no one would have the nerve to advance such a technicality after the first round. It was obvious then that Willard was whipped. The ring was cleared, the crowd settled back, and the bell tapped again. Round 2. Out came Willard, smiling that smile of his flabby legs shaking under every step that lifted his bulk forward, and now to the astonishment of everyone, the giant rallied. The big man tottered out for the second round. That is the only word which describes his coming. He tottered. Dempsey began tearing at him again, and eagerly as a wolf tearing at a wounded prey. Poor Jess fought back feebly. He could not keep the lighter man from slugging him to the ropes and then slugging him off the ropes again. He was battered all around the ring, but even so, someone suggested that Dempsey might be resting. No one believed Willard could possibly weather that second round, but he pushed on under a veritable barrage of hammering, not only to the end of that round, but to the close of the third. It was only a question of time when he must collapse, however. Round 3. Willard came out for the third round apparently desperate, as he met Dempsey's attack with both big hands flailing wildly. A right uppercut, which Jack delivered with a pop upward, brought blood pouring from Willard's mouth to swell the stream which was leaking from his nose and from the cuts on his face. Dempsey wore a pair of white silk running trunks. They were dyed crimson by the gore from Willard's wounds. Around the waist of the challenger was an American flag. The blue and white soon melted into the red. His brown body was splattered with Willard's blood, and Willard himself was red from his blue silk trunks to the top of his head. Willard almost fell when he went back to his corner at the close of the third round and stood for an instant before he sat down. He was almost blind. He was a welter of blood. He was weak and unable to defend himself. He fought through the second and third rounds with courage. He fought like a good fellow. Perhaps the acme of gameness might have been reached if he had gone out to be knocked senseless in the fourth, but the spectacle had already passed the stage of sport. It had become sheer butchery. Willard decided wisely. Squatted on the stool in his corner, a bleeding, trembling, helpless hulk, Jess Willard, the Kansas giant, this afternoon relinquished his title of heavyweight champion of the world, just as the bell was about to toss him into the fourth round of a mangling at the paws of Jack Dempsey, the young mountain lion in human form from the Sangre de Cristo hills of Colorado. He was a sad sight as he sat there, this ponderous fellow, who 4 short years ago was acclaimed the mightiest of men when he beat down Jack Johnson. The right side of his face was a pulp where the fists of the Indian brown boy from the Centennial State had been landing for 9 minutes with fearful force. The right eye of the champion was completely hidden behind the bloody smear. His left eye peered over a lump of flesh in grotesque fashion. The great doe-like body of the giant was splotched with red patches. They were the aftermath of Dempsey's gloves thumping there and giving back a hollow sound as they thumped. At the feet of the gargantuan pugilist was a dark spot which was slowly widening on the brown canvas as it was replenished by the drip, drip, drip of blood from the man's wounds. He was flecked with red from head to foot. The flesh on his enormous limbs shook like custard. He was like a man who had just been pulled from under the wreck of an automobile or railroad train, or had been met with some other grave accident. He blinked the one eye through which he could still see daylight at the glaring sun, looking out over the heads of the crowd that had gathered to see something like this. In the corner opposite him, tugging at the ring ropes like a pet terrier, pulling at the leash and scratching his feet on the resin canvas with sinister impatience, was the saddle-coloured demon who had ripped and pounded and slashed this tremendous fellow into this distressing state. It seemed incredible, and yet it was so. Another round was coming on, another round of mauling and maltreatment for the giant. The ox cannot beat the tiger. The bruised lips of the champion moved. He was mumbling some words. An instant later, and he was no longer champion of the world. Walter Monaghan, a sergeant in the United States Army and Willard's chief second, bent his head close to the bleeding mouth to hear what he had to say. Then Monaghan turned round and tossed a towel into the ring. This towel was spotted with blood. The rag rose no higher than the ring ropes and fell limply, but it represented the formal transfer of the heavyweight championship crown. It was surrender. Another instant passed until the crowd realized what had occurred, and then 40,000 persons went raving crazy for the moment. The towel had no sooner hit the ring floor than Willard was on his feet, walking over to meet the already advancing Dempsey with his gloved hand outstretched. He congratulated him after the time-honoured custom of beating ringmen, and Dempsey, showing his white teeth in a wide grin where before his face had been crinkled with sullen scowls, responded with a sort of condolence before delivering himself up to his friends. Then Willard lifted his ponderous bulk down from the ring and went into fistic oblivion, still smiling that strangely simple smile as they were raising the new champion high above the ring for all to see. The cheers that once rang in Willard's ears were now for the new king. The old pugilistic order had changed. The decent thing to do was to stop, and Willard stopped it. He will be bitterly reviled for quitting, but if boxing is designed to establish the better man, then this fight was over at the end of the first round. Condition cuts little figure in the affair this afternoon. It is the law of the old game that a man cannot give away a stretch of years to a young opponent. They have all tried, and they have all failed. If you want to read more, Damon Runyon writes about Jack Dempsey's early life and the Willard Championship fight in A Tale of Two Fists. The story continues in the second volume, The Champion, which details Dempsey's fights with Georges Carpentier, Tommy Gibbons and Louis-Angel Firpo. In the last volume, which chronicles Dempsey's life from 1923 to 1946, Runyon tells of how Dempsey lost his crown to Gene Tunney, yet still remained in many people's eyes the King of Fistiana. All three volumes are collected in The Complete Jack Dempsey, which is also available as a Kindle book. Also available is a collection of 26 accounts of World Heavyweight contests, with Damon Runyon at ringside, covering the years from 1915 to 1946 and including all the great World Heavyweight champions of the era: Dempsey, Louis, Tunney, Braddock, Johnson and more. If you enjoyed this video, then please like, comment, share and subscribe. See you next time.